Hello and welcome to everyone joining today's ISPOR webinar. Before we officially start the webinar, there are a few quick housekeeping items. All attendees have been joined to the webinar in listen-only mode. You can use the view options setting on your own device to adjust the view. We encourage you to submit questions to the panelists via the Q&A feature. The panelists will answer as many questions as possible during the webinar. The webinar is being recorded and will be available to registrants in approximately 2 business days. And now I will invite the moderator to begin the webinar titled Innovations in Value Communication, Optimizing Payer Engagement at the Local Level.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. Thanks for joining the webinar. Welcome to our webinar on innovation in the value communication and optimizing payer engagement at a local level. I'm Tim Gessner, a senior health economist and value communication consultant at Certara, and I'll be moderating this section. Today, the first speaker will be Pascaline Favier, a senior director of market access at Certara. She will be followed by Sean Braitz, our Vice President of US Business Development, and to finish, we will have a live Q&A session. Just so that everyone's aware, at the bottom of your screen, there should be a green Q&A box. So please click that widget and interact as a chat feature and ask your questions there. Before we begin, I would like to introduce you all to Certara and explain a little bit about our company and our capabilities in the market access and payer engagement space. At Certara, we optimize the entire drug development lifecycle from end to end, where over 90% of new drug approvals by the FDA since 2014 have been customers of Certara at some stage of the cycle. Our evidence and access division is the leading HEOR and value strategy advisor in Europe and North America. Next slide, please. They're the leading value communication strategy advisors in Europe and North America. They bring decades of experience of market access and pricing. They combine unmatched technical capabilities and advanced analytical methods with the deep relationships in the payer and healthcare technology assessment space, which allows them to inform key decision makers and maximize your overall product. At Base Case, we are the complete payer engagement software, which allows you to create and distribute and track mobile apps and to communicate the overall product value to other key stakeholders and to payers. This allows you to tailor your content in a clear and tailored fashion, which allows you to maximize your total impact. Currently, the software is used by roughly 70% of the top life science companies. Our clients have saved both time and money when developing mobile apps for CAMs and their various field teams. This has allowed them to overall accelerate their time to market. Next slide, please. Across Certara, our team are experts in their field with almost 1,000 employees specialized across different divisions. We currently have around 300 PhDs, PharmDs, and MD consultants, as well as over 100 market access specialists and 100+ software engineers, which continuously optimize their software across the broad spectrum of Certara products, which allows you to fulfill and meet current and future needs. Today, we'll be joined by 2 of those market access experts. With that being said, I would like to now welcome you to the webinar, and I will hand over to Pascaline, who will begin the presentation.
Thank you, Tim. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Pascaline Favier. I'm a senior director for market access at Certara. I have about 13 years of experience in HEOR and market access. And during my career, I had the opportunity to build a local payer engagement strategy and actually execute on it and engage with local payers such as pharmacists and hospital administrators. So I hope that today I can bring back some of that experience to you. Together with Sean, this webinar will cover 3 key topics. So why is it important to engage with local payers? How to build a successful local payer engagement strategy, And finally, what are the tools and customized solutions to engage digitally with payers? So first, why is it important to engage with local payers? As you know, your drugs or devices are assessed nationally by national payers. And if there is a positive evaluation from this national payer, it doesn't systematically mean that your product will be used at the local level. Your product will have to be registered on a formulary or selected by a purchasing center. And every hospital is different in terms of the size, capacity, budget, but also specialization in care, treatment pathways. And therefore, as a pharmaceutical industry, you would have to be flexible in terms of the solutions, evidence-based solutions that you bring forward to show value of your products. So who are those local payers? So local payers can be pharmacists, but they can also be physicians, hospital administrators, nurses. They have a role in the decision-making process, and they care about what happens in their own hospital or clinic. They tend to be less used to sophisticated data and have a greater focus on their localized budget. So in Europe, and I guess also in the world, each country is different as to the level of power of local payers. What we see, for instance, there are some local initiatives in Germany for diabetes where local groups and local key stakeholders actually provide incentives to doctors who proactively care for diabetes patients. And in England, the CCGs or clinical commissioning groups are well established and well known. Those groups are responsible for a geographical area, and they purchase products and services in this area. So they are guided also by the NHS, who provide guidance when it comes to best practices in certain therapeutic areas. So now that we have covered the importance of local payers, I would like to discuss with you how to build a strategy with local payers, so how to engage with them. Like for a marketing strategy, it all starts with market segmentation. That's what it's called in marketing, but we can apply that as well to market access. And the idea is really to spend time on understanding your environment. We have a tendency to go directly to the solution. However, spending the time to understand the market, your payers, the challenges they have and their needs is as important as the solution. Otherwise, you will build a solution that is not fit for purpose and not as impactful as it could be. The other purpose also of working on the environment, understanding your environment, is to create some archetyping. I know it's a word we use a lot, archetyping, or payer profile, we can say as well. The idea would be to use some demographic variables, descriptive variables. For instance, your hospital, the hospital is a private hospital or public hospital. Its capacity could be also a descriptive variable. And on top of those descriptive variables, you could use more behavioral variables. And that would relate to the payer behavior in terms of making the decision and in terms of their needs and challenges. So I will come back to the archetyping later on. So when you first build payer engagement strategy at the local level, I would recommend that you start with a strategic account that you know, to understand the process for inclusion of a new drug in this hospital, to map out who are the decision makers, who influences who, and what drives the decision. And this can be done also with the support of your field team. So the sales force and key account managers are definitely people internally that you want to leverage and engage with. So at the end of this step of mapping out the decision-making process and who are the stakeholders, you can plug them on this map, which is on the right side of the slide, to identify who are the key stakeholders. So the key stakeholders in this instance would be the one with the highest level of influence and also the highest level of interest. And what we know is that those key stakeholders generally have a spillover effect on other payers. So once you have mapped out the decision-making process at this strategic account, ideally you would meet virtually or face-to-face with those stakeholders. And the idea here is not to sell a solution or sell a product. It's again to understand the payer's need and the definition of value. So you would confirm the decision-making process, their level of influence, and understand what they care about when they make a decision. Again, you can leverage your field force, sales force, and key account managers here. In this meeting or in this step, you would go deep to the root cause to understand how payers make decisions, what drives the decision, what are they concerned about. And this will help you at the end of the meeting to build a payer profile and to start the archetyping exercise that I mentioned earlier. So once this step is done of understanding who are the stakeholders and what drives the decision, you can then adjust your product value proposition based on this information. You would focus on the attributes and the outcomes that are relevant to the local payer. And you can develop several tools. There are many solutions available to differentiate a product and to leverage the value proposition. So you can build a budget impact model, a cost calculator. You can also build an objection handler or value messages, as well as contracting tools with price and volume and discounts, depending on your product, of course, but also depending on the payer archetype and profile. Cost effectiveness model are also a tool that can be used with local payers. However, they tend to be a bit complex. And unless you're talking to someone who is an expert in health economics, I would recommend to stick to cost calculators and budget impact model. So once you have a good understanding of the payer needs and you have built your tools for your product or your portfolio, I will come back to that. It's important when you build it to be flexible. Like you cannot have an initial tool that is fixed. The idea would be to work also with the local payers to feed and adjust the tool. So let's say a cost calculator, you would want to meet with the payer, plug in his numbers, and have that flexibility to be able to meet their needs. So again, it's important to be flexible when it comes to local payer engagement versus national payer engagement. So I will give you an example of what I mean by also customizing the messages. So let's say you have a product that reduces complications in the ICU. So that will be the data you have from your clinical trial, for instance. So generally, the clinical trial will give you that information, the product reduced complication in the ICU. And if you talk to a local payer A, who is a pharmacist or a purchaser, and in the first step of your strategy, you understood that what this payer A cares about is to reduce the drug budget in the ICU while maintaining optimal care, then your message for product X would be not only to focus on less complication, but the so what. What does it mean for payer A? And in this case, for payer A, it would mean less drugs required and optimal care. For payer B, who is a hospital administrator and is trying to increase patient turnover in the ICU to have more patients coming in the hospital, For the same product and the same data, you would then, in the so what, you will say that less complications mean a shorter length of stay in the ICU and therefore an increased patient turnover. So my point being here that what's important with local payers is to go down the messages really at the level meeting their needs and challenges. You cannot stay at the study or the publication data, but try to really fit the message with their concerns. So once you have built those tools and customized them, hopefully targeted to the archetype and the payer profile, before you go and meet payers, if it's you or if it's your local, your field team, please make sure that everyone is properly trained on the tools, but also on identifying payer profile and archetype. Please make sure also that you set up KPIs and you monitor them. So this is based also on experience. It's something that we generally miss. And finally, after the meeting with this local payer, always reflect back on what went well, what can be improved, but also write down all the objections that were raised during that meeting so that you can prepare also counter messages and data. So that will be my last slide on globalization of your strategy. So as I mentioned before, you start with one account or a few strategic accounts to develop your archetyping, your variables, descriptive and behavioral variables. And then you would build some archetype and payer profile and tools that are meeting the needs of your customers. But then you want to globalize it. So then the idea would be to go through that process with your archetype and market segmentation and adjust your tools to different payers and profiles. And for that, you can use a centralized platform that will help you to monitor KPIs, but also keep everything at the same place so that you can adapt and adjust the tools digitally and easily. And if you have more than one brand in your portfolio that is targeted for local payers, you can also have those the same tools, but from a portfolio perspective. It's totally fine to go and talk to a hospital administrator with different brands together, because at the end of the day, you don't want to approach one customer on different meetings with different brands. The idea is to show a portfolio strategy and how much your payer can potentially save money using the full portfolio. So that's what I had for the past 15 minutes to introduce you to the key steps of developing a local payer engagement strategy. So I will now turn to Sean.
Thank you, Pascaline. Great job. Hi, everybody. My name is Sean Bates. I'm the VP of US Business Development for Certara Base Case. And during this session, we're going to be covering a few things: the market itself for digital engagement, and looking at some data sets, different sources of data from IQVIA, i4Pharma, Manhattan Research, and DRG, kind of just to get an idea of what the driving forces are for digital payer engagement. And we'll also be covering when and how to engage payers digitally, and looking at value communication considerations as well. Next slide, please. So when you look at the overall global market, it's pretty much dominated really right now with digital engagement, and this includes all marketing, not just payer marketing. For North America at 1.3 billion, and then as well as Japan. So those are the two foremost leaders. Then it's followed by the EU top 5 at 92 million with a growth rate of 4%. So when you take a look at those top 3, that's who's dominating the digital market space right now. And you can see the growth patterns with Japan and the United States are in double digits. Next slide, please. So there's a large opportunity, right? So when you're looking at this graphic of information here, in the far left side, you see the rest of the world, and then you see in the upper left, but a little bit further down the timeline, or the paradigm of the US and Japan. And so what you have is with the rest of the world, it's still dominated by traditional promotional channels and very little digital share and multi-channel sophistication. And even though the spending in the US and Japan is markedly significantly more, when you look at digital content sophistication, there's still a very large opportunity there. So overall, globally, there's about a 32% increase in the overall digital channel investment. And that only equates to about 2.3 billion in spend of the 71 billion in total promotional spend worldwide. Next slide, please. So when you take a look globally at the different countries, you can kind of see where their activity from a digital standpoint across all healthcare professional groups, not just payer groups, falls. So again, Japan and the USA, and then you have the top 5 rest of Europe, and then APAC or China. And really what this shows, there's a tremendous amount of opportunity to engage in the digital space. Next slide, please. So what are the barriers to digital engagement? So I4Pharma did a survey that I thought was pretty good, and it looked at what's stopping you from further applying digital technology and market access. And 73% of them were just really kind of unaware of the opportunity and unclear how to apply digital. So we'll cover that in this presentation as well. And then the second one was, what is your biggest barrier when it comes to successful payer engagement? And the large majority of people responded with a lack of message resonating with the payer. And so I think this goes down to a lot of what Pascaline was saying with not only local payers, national and regional payers as well, is that message really has to be tailored and refined. Next slide, please. So what we have here is that the companies are really kind of in exploratory mode. On the left-hand side, you have payers. The large majority of them want to work with pharma, and this information is from DRG and I4Pharma as well. They believe interactive content makes meetings more valuable, which I think is a critical component here, especially as you look at remote engagement or remote content. And they spend 3 out of 8 hours on digital resources daily. So on the left-hand side, you have this, and then on the right-hand side, there's a gap where you have only 9% of pharma engaging payers with digital content, and 45% in general is pharma's only beginning to explore payer digital engagement. So why is that? Because the large majority, over 55%, are unsure of what that opportunity is. So overall, when you look at this, less than 7% of prescriber sales and marketing is put onto payers. And so that particularly is a large gap. Next slide, please. So here we'll dig deeper into a little bit of the US data, since they are on really kind of the forefront of digital engagement currently. And when you look, 83% of hospitals, 74% of PBMs, 95% of payer formulary decision makers all agree that they are relying on digital sources for their committee work and decisions. In addition to that, they agree that the use of digital resources for P&T committee work is critical. So again, you have the payers, the PBMs, and the hospital formulary decision makers truly want to engage in this fashion. It's just, we're not there yet. Next slide, please. So more specifically, they think that websites and apps are critical. So when you look at hospital formulary decision makers, it's about 69%, PBMs 53%, and payers, formulary decision makers, at 43%. And they believe that websites and applications are, like I said, critical and essential for their committee member responsibilities. The big thing that we have to look at is, how do you measure that impact? And the critical part to that is analytics, and what those analytics do for you in terms of both face-to-face interactions when you're using digital engagement tools, but also for remote engagement tools. Next slide, please. So when and how to engage payers digitally. So really there's key components that are why you want to do that. Some of these are you want to come across as highly innovative. The data is much more clear, and it's the message that you deliver is much clearer and simpler when you're using engaging digital content. When you're looking at collaborative experience and those messages and those value messages, as well as the BIM, the data, the CEM, are all very specifically tailored to their communications. I mean, their patient populations. Then those communications are impactful, right? And on top of that, you increase the touch points. So here there's a significant opportunity with increased touch points where you have infrequent, maybe representative or face-to-face meetings, so you can supplement with digital engagement. Next slide, please. So what are those digital touch points? So as you can see, there's a lot of different ways. Basically, it falls into two categories. One is face-to-face or a hybrid type engagement over video teleconference, these kinds of things. Or it could be completely remote engagement of material through web portals or through websites, et cetera. So the key part to that is with digital engagement. How do you make the payer aware of your resources and tools? So there's a number of different ways that different companies have done that. LinkedIn, either through the key account directors themselves, through advertisements in journals like the AMCP. The biggest piece to your content is, are you discoverable and are you winning the moments that matter? And with that said, is how do you get them to go to your site, right? So, and then how do you measure it, right? Knowing the value of the impact of your materials is a critical aspect, as discussed before with payer analytics. Next slide, please. All right, so I covered this already. Basically two different ways to engage digitally, even with all those touch points. It really kind of falls into two categories. Next slide. So in creating digital communication tools across the payer engagement continuum, what are the most common tools that we end up creating for clients most of the time? So in the bold, you'll see this. And this is along the product life cycle. Value decks, care flow treatment pathway tools that are interactive, usually that contain also HEOR repositories. We do a lot with interactive payer support portals, e-dossiers, both interactive face-to-face, but also for remote engagement. Value story BIMs and CEMs, both interactive for face-to-face, but also remote. And hospital value analysis folios, face-to-face and remote as well. So later on in the product life cycle, you see a lot more use of scientific document portals, comparative analysis and share shift simulators that can be developed, contract reimbursement and contracting dashboards to really keep an eye on which customers are performing at the level you want them to perform with your contracts. Payer pull-through tools for provider targeting to make sure that the message that you're providing at a local level with the provider, as well as, let's say, a hospital or local payer, really is on target. Interactive product information portals and contracting comparison simulators to effectively communicate why one type of contract might be more advantageous versus another type of contract. The key is, how do you know with these remote engagement tools or these digital engagement tools that are face-to-face as well? How do you know how well they're working? And that goes back to the tracking of the analytics. So you have to have a platform and applications that allow you to see what the user is looking at, what data they're interacting with. And in today's platforms, most of the time, data is done as a PDF and it's downloaded, right? And you look at the PDF and you're like, okay, it was downloaded 50 times. It was downloaded by these users. You may know what screen or what pages they spent on. That's probably the extent of it. So there are other platforms that are out there that allow you to dive even deeper into that. And so with the design of interactive and digital tools, you want to make sure that you put the core interactive data front and center. And you want to be able to track specifically the analytics around the engagement that you've tailored for those individual payers, whether they be regional payers, national payers, and local payers. The nice thing about remote engagement is allows you to touch a lot of those local payers that you would not be able to touch regularly, right? Because field forces are only so big. Typically, they will focus on regional and national payers, and the local payers are difficult to reach. So that's where I think there's the biggest opportunity for digital communication and remote engagement through the use of different portals. But you know, I've seen some of the top tier companies utilize value decks, e-dossiers, and the remote use of those two things, as well as value stories, PIMs, and CEMs. Next slide, please. So the question you have to ask yourself when you're creating these tools is, are they dynamic, are they innovative, and are they tailored to the engagement, right? So here are just some screenshots of some of the tools we've developed over time. But these could be used remotely. And the interactions and analytics behind these tools are what's critical for most of our clients. So when they look at it, they're looking at specifically how they're interacting with the different data sets. How are they interacting with the simulator itself, and being able to track the potential impact that their tools are having and their message is having, as well as the data with each payer. Next slide. So what are some of the value communication considerations that we have when we're producing these tools? Next slide. So one is, and we've talked to this a little bit already, and Pascaline talked to this considerably, was who's your audience, right? So with local payers, who are they in particular? With KOLs and HCPs that might be on the hospital level on P&T committees, as well as other boards, politicians and patient advocacy groups, regulators, etc. So who is your message targeted to? And then take a look at what data you have and what data you want to present to those folks. So you have to be able, in developing your value communication proposition, to be able to talk to the medical importance, the therapeutic value, the patient benefit, the value that the payer gets for the money, and as well as the financial impact overall. Next slide, please. So here is one final example of some work we've done with a case study in the UK, where we were asked to build interactive tools to aid in negotiations of key payers and stakeholders. The critical aspect was, how do we know we had impact? And the best way to do that in this format was to be able to measure how many approvals for the product were actually accomplished. And so with this, in our case study, we were able to get over 100 different local health economies and product approval. And in looking at it, we facilitated visualizing the value story, as well as enabling audiences to clearly see the benefits of the new product in their localized population. So that message, going back to that previous slide, was really geared around their local patient population and the discussion of what they are seeing using their data as well. And the tool had to be interactive enough to be able to do that. So with that said, I think to close this up for me, and this last slide, is that there's a lot of opportunity in the environment for digital marketing and digital engagement, specifically of payers. And we really kind of just touched the surface on that, even just in the United States as well as Japan. There's a tremendous opportunity globally to do that as well. And so you like we said, you can do it in really kind of three different ways: face-to-face hybrid tools, the second being remote engagement tools through websites or portals, and then really tracking the analytics behind that return so that you can modify that message and you can really help to target and have impact on the payers for their specific patient populations. All right, well, that concludes my session. So I think we're going to go to questions.
Yep, perfect. Thank you, Sean. Great presentation. So I'm going to try to ask some of the questions in the kind of chronological order that they came up. So One of the first questions is, how can one address the patient's quality of life aspects where there's little financial benefit? And what's basically the best way to showcase, QOL benefits where the financial benefits aren't that clear?
So, Sean, you want me to take this one?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you mean the quality of life, if the quality of life benefit doesn't translate, it's not easy to turn quality of life into financial.
No, so
sure.
if there's not that much financial benefit, but there is quite a lot of quality of life benefit.
Yeah,
so
that's yeah. Yes. Well, quality of life benefit are more and more perceived by payers at the national level. At the local level, not so much, to be honest, not yet. There is, of course, clinicians who understand quality of life, instruments and measures and data. But when it comes to pharmacists or hospital administrators, this is not something that they are used to see. So I would say that it would be important to educate payers actually on those measures to ensure that the value of the product in terms of quality of life is recognized. So it's a lot about education, I believe. Does it answer the question?
Yep, I think it does. Thank you for that. Sean, when you refer to FacetoFace Tools, could you please clarify what you were kind of referring to there? And part of this is a second question that is kind of similar, is what did you mean when you were saying digital engagement of payers? Do you mean Zoom calls, e-magazine, et cetera?
Yeah, so to be more specific about that, when you look at face-to-face engagement tools, there's a couple of different things that you can do. One, you have iPads, smartphones, you have your laptop, and this could be an engagement that is over video teleconference, or it could be an engagement that is face-to-face. As face-to-face meetings become more infrequent, I think you see the video teleconference and the education of the general public on how to use remote engagement, in particular, like video teleconferences. You'll see the use of these kinds of digital tools that can be utilized in those presentations. Secondly, the other type of tool that we were talking about was remote engagement tools. So the content and the applications that you have or tools you have to be interactive enough to where the client can go on there like a value dossier and click through it. It's intuitive. They can see the layering of the different pieces of data that you have in there that showcase and support the story that you're telling. So those are really kind of the two different ways, and that's what I meant by face-to-face, as well as potentially hybrid. Does that answer the question, Tim?
Yep, no, I think it does. Thanks for that. Another question would be more in regards of how do you prepare for a face-to-face meeting? So for example, how would you suggest to obtain the exact needs from payers or customers without knowing what they need before the meeting? So what is the best way to ensure that you don't waste that meeting during an engagement on a local level?
Yeah, so that's a very good point. So it's not my experience being in the field and talking to customers. So there is a preparation time. So you're trying to gather as much as you can from this on this payer based on the field force. Normally they should know at least some information about that payer. Now, if you don't have any information, the objective of the first meeting, as I said, is really to try and get those answers without trying to sell a tool first. And I know it's not easy to get those appointments. Something that worked well when I was working in a pharmaceutical company in a European position is actually me being in the meeting. So as a European lead for the company, the doors were more open, let's say. So the hospital and the decision makers at the hospitals opened their doors a bit more easily to me. Now, something else that can be done is also to send a survey or questionnaire to payers to understand, so do some qualitative research beforehand to grasp also some, to get some inputs as to what are their current challenges. And this is something that can evolve over time, obviously, in terms of what are their challenges. So you can also reapply that survey to monitor any changes.
I'd like to jump in on that too a little bit, Pascaline. So I like your point about, you know, the trying to gather insights and whatnot, right? And questionnaires for those local payers in particular, which I think is a great source of information. And digitally, in terms of digital engagement, that's a great way of doing that. So we have a number of clients that actually do that through different portals that are select to payers, where they have their own individual workspace and they can go in and collect insights, data, and answer surveys prior to those engagements or as they're going through these types of engagements. And then secondly is being able to have a tool, I think, that allows you to enter inputs in and enter data in as you're having the discussion. So that it's not just a data collection meeting. You're also able to collaborate, insert data into your different models, and then be able to say, look, this is how it can impact you as well. So not only before when you're preparing for the engagement, can you do it through insights collection? But I think you can also do that if you have the right digital engagement tools during the interactions themselves as well.
Perfect. So next question is in regards to COVID. So it's obviously a very strange time. So we got a question about, has COVID shifted the way that these digital engagements go? And are there any differences between the US and Europe that we've noticed? And what strategies are most effective?
Yeah, so with COVID, there's definitely a change or difference. And I alluded to that in the presentation a little bit when we spoke about people's educational level on video teleconference and social media in particular, especially in the healthcare space. So when you look at digital engagement in general, the healthcare industry and pharma in particular has been slow to adopt digital engagement across the globe. But with COVID, that speeds that up pretty considerably. And so we've seen that with a large number of clients, is that they're really looking at ways now to have multiple touch points, particularly with payers, because face-to-face meetings have been deprioritized, right? With the education of people having and understanding how to use video teleconference capabilities and other social media, you know, they're not as keen to necessarily set up time out of their daily schedule to see that. So that's been part of the biggest change we've seen. What was the second part of that question, Tim?
Difference between US and Europe.
Oh, yeah. So the difference between thank you, Pascal. Difference between US and Europe. In the initial slides, you saw it. A lot more spending has gone into digital engagement from the perspective of the US and Japan versus the rest of Europe. So right now, there's this transition of how do we take our normal assets and our normal content that's traditional and make it engaging. You know, so what are the options that are out there to do that? And so that's one of the things that we've been able to offer with the company, is that you can actually develop content that's highly engaging and specifically tailored to the stakeholders that you want to engage. The adoption of that we're seeing in globally as well as the US.
Perfect. Our next question is about the base case platform. And does it allow pharma companies to make changes and create these apps on their own, or are they dependent on our programmers, or how does that work?
So it could be a combination of both. The platform itself, you are capable of developing your own applications, or we could, through our professional services, we can develop the apps and tools as well. Since it's a no-code system, the speed at which apps can be developed or tools can be developed is anywhere between 4 or 5 times faster than typical app development. So with some of our top tier clients, you have anywhere between 100, 200 to 1,000 different tools being created on that platform for engagement, right? And those engagements are specifically tailored and can be changed for the different stakeholders, as well as different types of tools, like that one slide that showed the various different tools that pharma clients are building throughout the product lifecycle.
Yep, perfect. So Pascaline, this might be for you. This was earlier on in the presentation. So what type of tools resonate most with the local payers?
Yeah, so as I said in my presentation, I think local payers tend to prefer less sophisticated data. And what I mean here is, for instance, budget impact model or cost calculators, but that are simple and digest the data to the level that is understandable by anyone. So what I've seen using cost calculators in the field, as soon as we were trying to be too technical in the assumptions, but also in the formula, let's say in the models, then it gets too complex and it creates some uncertainty from the client customer side. They would ask questions. So my recommendation is to go for simple as much as possible, evidence-based all the time. So cost calculators, budget impact models, and also just simple messages, you know, on a slide deck, messages supported by evidence. And again, going back to customizing your tools, try to deliver messages that are really tailored to the needs. So don't stay on the level, at the level of the data in the trial, but try to understand the, so what does it mean for the payer?
I was going to say too, educational materials, that if you can digitally produce educational materials for them on the disease state as well as the patient population, those tools, especially for local payers, since they don't have a lot of resources, are, I think, extremely valued. But also you might be able to do evidence generation as well with those local payers.
Yeah, perfect. So, you know, when conducting market research with payers, some people can find it challenging to include, you know, medical policy decision makers to get deeper insights. Who would need to be interviewed for that?
I'll let you take that, Pascaline.
So can you repeat that? Sorry. So medical policies and?
Yes. So when conducting market research with payers, this person finds it challenging, you know, to include medical policy decision makers, and to get, you know, deeper insights. Who would need to be interviewed for that?
Well, again, in this first step of developing your strategy, so you would map out the decision makers. Now the thing is, depending on your account, it might be more challenging to get the right person directly. So you would map out also the people around, or other decision makers at this hospital level or clinics. And then this person hopefully would then have an influence on the others. So from a medical policy, definitely the clinicians, I guess this is a US, so maybe a US person asking, because that's not really a term we use in Europe, medical policies. But the clinicians that are key opinion leaders in the hospital or head of services definitely are strong influences as to what is being used. They influence the pharmacist generally, but sometimes the pharmacist is actually overseeing the clinicians when it comes to making the decision. So I don't have a straight answer to that question, to be honest with you. But I think once you map out all your stakeholders in the account and try to get a touch point with them, you will see some barriers sometimes, or walls. Some people will not want to talk to you, so you have to find a way around and talk to others that might influence this person. I don't know if I answered the question, to be honest.
Perfect. No,
You
I think
tell
it
me.
was, I think it was good. So Sean, this one's for you. So how would you recommend remotely engaging in many smaller local payers?
Yeah, so as we talked about before, you know, you have a field force, right? And that field force typically gets focused on national and large regional payers. When it comes to the local payers, it's either left to local representatives, but oftentimes there's just a lack of engagement period, right? So what you try to do is try to remotely engage them. There are different ways to do that. You can do it through emails. You can do it through different pieces of social media. You can do it on LinkedIn. But I think the most profound way to do it is through customized workspaces. So you create these workspaces with different tiers for the different payers that you want, and different segments of payers, where you can provide value dossiers, where you can provide insights, collections, and surveys. You can provide education and scientific materials. The key to engaging the local payer mix, right, is you have to, one, be specific to the type of local payer. And then you have to be able to track the analytics of and look at and have analytics based on what is the impact you're having with that payer, right? And provide some method or form of two-way communication and collaboration. The more that you can do that and see how your message resonates, I think the better impact you can have. So the biggest thing is you have to work in conjunction with you know, local contacts and local representatives, as well as, you know, being discovered and getting your information out there, but then having a space for them to work in where they can look at your materials and engage with your materials directly.
Yeah, perfect. And kind of to stay on that local zoomed in topic and impact of these meetings, a question came up about the ability to analyze the engagement, right? So what kind of tools do we have to analyze that on an app or content tool level?
Yeah. So you know, a lot of the time for remote engagement materials, companies are kind of stuck with PDFs or a website where you download PDF content, right? And in the PDF content, the best that you can really track or analyze are who downloaded it, how many times, and what pages are they spending time on, right? But there's a lot of content on a page, and there are a lot of pages. So when you look at a platform and you look at tools that you're creating, you want to be able to create tools where you have analytics that can look at specific data engagements. So in other words, if you have certain study data, or you have certain simulations you want them to run, or that they can run with your tools, you can track all of that with the analytics. So it might be a heat map, right, per slide in the data, or per page, where you can see where they're spending their time versus where they're not spending your time. You can actually put in addition, direct feedback mechanisms to know whether or not your data is having the impact you want it to have, as well. And so there are different ways that you can do that. I mean, that takes a high level of customization, which you can do with some platforms. And I think it's particularly important to really understand how you aggregate that data and segment it, and how that compares to your advisory boards or your field force as well.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, one question from the medical device space. So Sean, as you know, I know you're medical device expert. You know, hospitals have to negotiate in bundles. And from your point of view, what is the best approach, you know, when dealing in the medical device space? Payer, hospital, or combined?
Best approach into what? Bundling products?
No, I guess what would be the best approach to, you know, tackling that type of meeting when you're dealing with a med device product?
mean, from a digital engagement perspective, I think when you look at medical device and you have multiple offerings, being able to communicate the total cost effectiveness of all those offerings and what value brings is particularly important. And that can get very difficult when you have lots of data and lots of information. I think that's where these digital engagement tools come into play, is you can streamline that message and then be able to show comparisons where it would be very difficult and you'd be hard pressed to do that with multiple Excel calculators pulled up versus a PDF or several PDFs pulled up at the same time while you're trying to show data and then trying to input their data into your calculator, et cetera. So, I think understanding, going back to what Pascaline said, when you're talking about local payers like a hospital, you really have to understand what their needs are and what they're being metriced on and what they're looking at in terms of how they're generating revenue or saving revenue. And apply that digital tool to those needs specifically and how your multiple products meet those needs. Pascaline, you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, no, well, bundle is not allowed in Europe, so I'm guessing this is more US as well.
I mean, that's a general answer. I mean, I can answer that more specifically offline as
No,
well.
but for medical devices, I mean, I worked in medical devices before, and that was what I was selling, let's say, in the field. But I think the working with hospitals and so the national payers is definitely key to get your product approved and reimbursed. But then you need really to your local strategy is almost more important than the national one. So you need to engage with local payers, local hospitals, and identify again who are the key stakeholders there, and have the right tool. And for medical devices, really need to simplify the complex in terms of HEOR, because I've seen a question also about what HEOR people should be doing. And I think simplifying models is definitely the right thing to do with local payers without compromising the quality of your models, obviously.
Yeah, I think the economics is what's really critical with the hospital as well. So, anybody who's touching that piece, like whether it's materials management, whether it's your chief financial officer, understanding what it is that they're using for their metrics and how your product can fit into that in particular as it comes to reimbursement, as well as, let's say, length of hospital stays or some of the core measures that they're looking at as they get reimbursement as well from a national level or even from local plans is particularly important.
Perfect. So another question that was brought up is that, often HEOR tools for local payers show efficiencies. They like to use the word efficiencies and reduction in burden, et cetera, on nurses and pharmacists. So some of the customers may fear that their jobs would no longer be needed or not needed as much. How would you remedy such a fear?
Well, it's all about how you frame your message, right? So to me, if you reduce time spent by the nurse, let's say, on transfusing patients or taking care of patients in the ICU, it's not about the message should not be about you reduce your personnel, or you could reduce your personnel, but is how more efficient you can be, meaning that this nurse can take care of another patient, and therefore you can increase your patient turnover. So it's really about how you present your message in a positive way, and that makes sense also for the payer.
Perfect. Sean, I got a question for you. So how are the top tier companies, in your experience, how do they externalize their content?
Oh yeah, so it's particularly when it comes to the top tier clients. We've got a lot of examples of e-dossiers. So they'll take their dossiers and they'll put them in digital form and put them in a workspace or a portal where it can be interacted with. Another use case are simulators or contract simulators. So where a payer can go in and enter in their own data and run different simulations on those contracts. Another big one is where we have had payer support materials and websites for payer support materials, and taking that content that was static and making it dynamic and engaging, and then being able to track the analytics around all those examples. So all, anything dealing with interaction with the payer can be converted into something that's tailorable, but also very, very dynamic and very engaging, and where you can track the analytics around it to know whether it's potentially having impact or not.
Perfect. Another interesting point that came up was, if products are kind of similar or in a similar class as something that's already, that's already out there, is it still relevant to engage with the local payers? And then what do you demonstrate in such a case?
Okay, so if they have the same efficacy, I would say, or same profile and data, right? So in that case, I would still go and develop tools to support your product, because it's, even if you don't have a premium products in terms of value differentiation for the payer, you still want to defend your market and making sure that you are listed on the hospitals. So to me, whether your product is a premium innovative product or more a Me Too product, you still have to defend it in the field. And there are solutions to show differentiation.
Yeah, I think the key is positioning it to the appropriate patient population, right? And the appropriate indication and what impact it can have for them, no matter what product you have in your portfolio. That way it's not confusing to the payer.
Yeah, perfect. So I think this will be our final question, because we're close to time, or we're a bit over time. But one final question would be, should we engage with accounts, where the product is currently listed, or should we use it with only competitive accounts?
So to build a strategy, you should first start with accounts If you start with competitive accounts that are difficult to switch, you will lose hope, let's say. So I would start with accounts to get some lessons learned and understand the payer's need and challenges. And those accounts can actually help you in defining the right messages if you have a good relationship with them. So I would not start with the competitive one. But in the strategy, you will have to get to them at some point. Yeah.
Perfect. No, I think we're at time, guys. So I think we can wrap it up. Thanks for the presentation and the Q&A session. If there are any unanswered questions, can you guys be reached out directly to follow up? Or
yeah,
perfect.
Yes, let me share quickly our.
Perfect. So any open questions or any other questions that were not asked, but any interest, please just follow up with the emails listed here. And that's it for the webinar. Thanks for everyone for joining.
Thank you, everyone.
Please join me in thanking the presenters for their time and expertise. An additional thank you to all the attendees for participating and submitting your questions for discussion. The full-length webinar recording will be made available on the ISPOR webinar series webpage in approximately 2 business days. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.